Welcome to the professor panel portion of our Women in Science event. If you're just joining us, we're so happy you're here to celebrate International Day of Women and Girls in Science with us. We're now going to hear from some of the professors in our own science community. Please feel free to put questions for the professors in the Q&A box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. Now I'm going to ask each of the professors to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their background. And we're going to start with Dr. Taylor. Hi, Dr. Taylor.
Hi, my name is Wendy Taylor. I'm a physics and astronomy professor. I typically teach particle physics, electromagnetism, and I also teach some of the laboratory courses in the physics department. And I've been a professor in the Faculty of Science for 17 years.
Thanks, Dr. Taylor. It's great to have you. Dr. Heffernan.
Hi, I'm Jane Heffernan. I started my position at York in 2007. I'm in the Math and Stats department, and I am a disease modeler. And so the pandemic has been a very busy time. And at York, I mainly teach first year calculus, third year mathematical biology and mathematical modeling in the fourth year, and mathematical epidemiology and mathematical immunology as well.
Thank you, Dr. Heffernan. Dr. Hyde.
Thanks. Greetings, everyone. As I like to start off a lot of my talks, greetings, fellow humans. I'm Dr. Elena Hyde. I'm actually newly the director of the Alan I. Carswell Observatory at York University. And I've been an assistant professor at York just a little bit longer than that. So fairly recently moved to Canada. And I have a bunch of hats on at the moment. I do a lot of research in galactic archaeology, which means I do a lot of data science, artificial intelligence, things like that, and a bit of engineering, a bit of all kinds of different things to keep the telescopes on campus running happily. And I teach, I've actually also got an E&M course I'm teaching, but I'm hoping to start teaching a galaxy class soon, and maybe even a data science class.
Thanks, Dr. Hyde. Dr. Pat.
Hi, my name is Dr. Patricia Lakin Thomas, but because that's too long and hard for everybody to remember, they call me Dr. Pat. I'm a biology professor. I typically teach cell biology courses. I have a fourth year advanced cell biology course right now, and I'm also teaching a course in my specialty, which is circadian rhythms, biological clocks. And I've been a professor in the Faculty of Science for 20 years. And I am currently sitting in Charles Darwin's study at Down House in Kent in southern England. And this is where Charles Darwin wrote on the origin of species. And I've actually had the privilege of standing right here and seeing this in person.
Thank you. It's so great to have you all here with us tonight. Thank you. So we'll start off with the first question, but before I ask the question, if you are just joining us now, you can put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So my first question for the professors is, what made you want to pursue your degrees in the sciences? Yeah, Dr. Pat. You're on mute.
The story I always like to tell is about my first term at college. I'm actually a US citizen as well as a Canadian. And I went through education in the US system where you don't have to choose a major until your second year, really. And I was interested in lots of things in high school. I'm a good writer. I really enjoyed writing. And so I was taking English courses. I was taking history and biology and music. And I couldn't decide what my major was going to be. And I was good at writing essays in the English course. And my English professor called me in and said, "Would you like to be an English major?" And I just blurted out, "I don't know what I could do with it except teach." And he went, "What's wrong with that?" But then in the biology lab, we were looking at plants under the microscope, and we had a little leaf from a pondweed. And you can see this chloroplast zooming around and around in the leaf. And I just said, "What is that? How does that work?" Bearing in mind this was a long time ago, the professor said, "We actually don't know." And that was the first time anyone had ever pointed out to me that there were fascinating things left to find out that nobody knew. And so that's what decided me. I realized I probably couldn't do anything original in English, but in science, I could find out things that nobody had ever seen before and really contribute something original. And that's how I made my decision.
Thanks, Dr. Pat. Dr. Heffernan.
Well, I always liked mathematics and I always liked biology and health. So I thought I'd want to be a teacher or a doctor. And when I was in high school, I went to my guidance counselor and asked, what can I do with math other than teach? And she said I could be a pilot or an architect. And so she didn't even say engineering. So I wasn't sure I wanted to be either of those. And I had a lot of teachers in the family. So I decided to go to university in concurrent education and do a degree in math and computer science with teaching. And it was in my final year of my undergrad in fourth year where I took a course called mathematical modeling. And the textbook was written by Leah Cachette, and she's a disease modeler or a mathematical biologist at the University of British Columbia. And that course just totally changed my world. It introduced me to mathematical modeling in biology and disease modeling. And that's when I decided that I was not going to be a teacher. I would go to graduate school and hopefully become an academic and a professor.
Thank you, Dr. Heffernan. Dr. Taylor.
Yeah, I was always fascinated by physics phenomena, even from a very young age. And so anything that you could observe in nature that you didn't understand, like what Dr. Pat said. And in grade school, I think it was in grade 7, we had an astronomy unit in the science class. And of course, that was super cool. I did a little film strip for the National Film Board contest on the life of a star. And then in high school, we started doing computer programming. And, I know I don't look that old, but really I'm way older than you think. And this was way right in the first days of computer programming at school. But I thought that was really cool. And I think by the end of my high school, I realized that you could do computer programming and physics together in, pursuit of like cosmology or astronomy or something. But when I got into university, I was at the University of British Columbia, and TRIUMPH Particle Physics Laboratory is on the campus there. And I got to do a summer work term at TRIUMPH, and I fell in love with particle physics. So that's what I do now.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Dr. Hyde.
Thanks. Yeah, I figured I'd just real quick share mine. It's pretty uncommon in the sense that when I was in high school, I just wanted to do absolutely everything. And I was not terribly fortunate because I was in a kind of a bad high school. I didn't have good advisors, those people that are supposed to give you hints and tips. And I had a medical sort of thing where I missed about 3 or 4 months of school. And they told me, oh, we're actually not going to let you make up your classes for 3 or 4 months that you missed. So I was just really frustrated and I wanted to go do everything. So I didn't have math because I wasn't allowed to take it for unknown reasons to me. It's baffling. So I was in this strange situation where I wanted to learn all these things, but I didn't have basic math. And I had all of a sudden 3-4 months worth of work that I couldn't make up. So I found when I came back, I was actually able to scrape out a passing grade, freshman, sophomore, junior year, while still missing all that work and not having made any of it up because they literally wouldn't take the assignments. So I left and went to college. and then I was very surprised to find out that actually there was math all over. And once you start looking at all of the things that you don't know, it quickly becomes really, really interesting. So if you want to know a little bit about everything, science is a great place to be, and especially if you don't mind being very, very confused. And if you like the challenge of that unknown, the mystery, figuring things out, I think that's what got me hooked. And, finding a place where you could go in and just throw your whole brain at a problem really was super inspiring to me. And so knowing that there's places like that out there was really exciting. And that's kind of not how I got my degree, but that's definitely how I got into it.
Thank you all for those answers. Our next question is, do you have any advice for women looking to pursue a career in the sciences? Yeah, Dr. Hyde.
I can sort of answer this one as well with a little bit of a different tact, in that it's who you're working with matters so much. And there's always going to be places where you find yourself in a group or a lab or a research area or a school, and it's not going to be easy to progress there. So having an ability to look around and ask for, extra research positions or volunteer positions outside of where you are is really, really good. And there's a great quote from Ice-T that I always like to tell people. It's one of my favorite quotes. When people are pulling at you left and right to do things in life and business, remember that's what they want, not necessarily what you want. And that's kind of I don't know, if I had to give just one piece of advice, I would probably give Ice-T advice.
Thank you. Dr. Taylor.
Sure. Yeah, I think if you're interested in pursuing a career in science, it would be good to learn about the field that you're interested in. Maybe try to find some women in that field, not necessarily women, but to find out what that field is like, so you can try and talk to them. I think it's also good to do some self-reflection on what your strengths and weaknesses are. Try to understand that as early as possible so that you can play up your strengths. But also, maybe if you think you actually have weaknesses, try to find a way to address them or maybe work around them. For example, if you're afraid of computers, take a computing class and get a tutor to help you. And then I think it can help really if you do have a roadmap, so you have a plan. But if you hit a roadblock, you need to be flexible. And being flexible means maybe changing your plan a little bit, looking at the other paths that you can take and seeing, if you have to do something different to work around that roadblock, or maybe go down a different path altogether. So that's my advice.
Thank you. Dr. Heffernan, would you like to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add too that you can often get bad advice from counselors and other individuals. I was told that I was bad at science in grade 8, and I took that to heart, and I thought that I was bad at science. Then I realized that I wasn't. And when I was in high school, I was told that I wasn't very good at physics. And then when I went to university and I decided to take a couple of physics courses, the professors there tried to convince me to do a physics degree instead of a math degree. And so my advice is, if someone tells you you're not good at something, don't believe them. Make up your mind for yourself and do some self-reflection, just like what Wendy just said. It's more important for you to understand yourself than for you to get other people to tell you what you're good at.
Thank you. So our next question is, did you have a role model that influenced your decision to work in science?
I would say that I certainly was looking at, when I was in undergrad, I was looking at some of my professors and seeing how they were tackling some questions. And so when I decided that I was going into graduate school, I went to look for professors, not to apply to a certain school for grad school, but to look for who I wanted to work with as a grad student. So I went around and interviewed professors to see, you know, how I could have a good relationship. And I tried to choose someone that would be a good role model for me. And so my role model is my PhD supervisor.
Thank you, Dr. Heffernan. Yeah, Dr. Hyde.
Yeah, I had a really cool professor in the U.S. in Arizona, actually. So I bounced around to a few different universities and ended up at the University of Arizona. And I had an amazing physics professor, Dr. Adriana Pesci, who was brilliant. And so actually this goes with a line of advice: if at all possible, take your classes in order. Because I jumped into her third year class as a first year transfer student with no knowledge of differential equations. And she was so brilliant and amazing, and a tour de force, really, just a powerhouse of physics. I went to the tutorials and I got through it. I passed her class. Her mechanics class, and then I went back and took her second year class the next year. But she was a incredible inspiration because she was so mathematical and so completely, absolutely master of all things physics. And I just looked at that and was like, I am never going to be that smart, but she's amazing. So I learned all I could from her, and eventually, after about 3 years, I finally got up enough courage to talk to her and ask her. I had just gotten into my first astronomy conference, and I was like, I'm so sorry, I have to ask you a question that's not physics related, but what do scientists wear to conferences? Like, how are you supposed to go there? And she gave me some great advice, which is just good for all science, actually, which is just get a suit jacket, you'll be fine. And this amazing physicist actually, she looked at me and was just like, meet me at the corner of Speedway and something in Tucson, Arizona at 4 p.m. on Thursday, in front of this store. She walked me into the store and actually got me a $30 suit jacket. And I never had the courage to talk to her again, but she was incredibly inspirational, and it's one of my favorite people of all time. I still very much feel like I will never be that smart, but it's really wonderful to see people like that who are so incredibly good at what they do, and I just found it very inspirational and heartening, I suppose.
Thank you, Dr. Hyde. So our next question will be, what would you say is your biggest achievement or your proudest moment during your journey in the science field? I see we have some thinking faces.
Well, I guess I'll say that one of the biggest achievements that I've had is that I've been actually able to, during the pandemic, make a difference with the modeling that I've been doing during COVID. And so just helping to inform people, even public outreach, going on the radio, helping to inform the public too. I think that that's super important, and I've been very happy to be able to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Heffernan. Does anybody else have a proudest moment? We can, oh yes, Dr. Hyde.
I can probably give, it's, it's awfully hard to say that, because it's on the one hand, you always have a little feeling of like, what are you most proud of? But I think, it has to be the first official degree, right? Because when I got my first official bachelor's degree, it was something that my parents had never done, and nobody I knew had ever done, and it was very, very different from everything that I had kind of thought of before. And so it was it's the start actually of a long journey, but I thought it would end up being like, this was, I'm done now, right? So you're really like, this is amazing. I'm all done. My bachelor's degree. And of course you're never really done with science. It's, but it was really impactful for me, just because I had at that point learned for the first time about, well, not just gradients, but physics and astronomy and engineering and math. And it's this whole other world that I had never seen before. So it was really, yeah, and the telescopes in Arizona are amazing. So that was something I was just really, really happy with.
Thank you. Dr. Taylor.
Sure. I guess I have two moments that are memorable for me. The first moment was when I was doing my PhD defense. So, you know, you do all the research, you write the dissertation, and then you submit it, and then you have to stand in front of a room of men and defend it. And at the University of Toronto, there were two defenses. The first one, they didn't invite the external examiner because they didn't want to be embarrassed if if you messed up. And then they would have, once you pass the first one, you would get to go to the second one where they invite the external examiner. And I remember in the first one, I totally blanked out on one particular piece of jargon, basically, in my field. And my supervisor was like, she knows this. And I was getting grilled and I couldn't. Anyway, the bottom line was I was in tears at the end of that, but they passed me. And I went to the second one, and we had the external examiner, and he's looking at my thesis, and he's like, I don't know what to ask you. Everything is explained so well. And at the end, they kick you out of the room, and then you sit there waiting, like, are they going to pass me or not? But I knew they were going to pass me, and it was like, yay, I did it. And then the second thing that was really awesome was shortly after I joined York, I was leading a small team, and we were looking for a new phenomena that had been predicted, but nobody had ever seen it in particle physics. And my small team was able to observe evidence of this phenomena for the first time. And we managed to get that publication submitted. And even though there was another experiment that published a much better measurement about 7 or 8 months later, we were still first. So that was like awesome.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing those. That was great. So the next question is, what are some of the challenges you've had to overcome in your field? Yeah, Dr. Pat.
So I suppose this goes along with maybe a proudest moment, although it wasn't a moment. It took a long time. Many years ago, I was studying my fungus, which has a daily rhythm, and that's what I study, try to work out what the actual mechanism is for how a fungus can tell time, or how any organism can tell time. And I had done a set of experiments, and I had a particular expectation for what was going to happen, because there's a model for how this clock in organisms should work. And I thought, well, this is what's going to happen. I'll just, confirm that. And it came out the opposite from what I expected. And I checked it and did a bunch more experiments, and that's what was happening. And so I had to publish by saying, this model everybody thinks is correct isn't really enough, because I've got this thing that doesn't fit your model at all. And there was quite a lot of pushback from that, from the people who had a vested interest in the current model, because they've published all their papers in that. It's their reputation that has been built by promoting that model. Some of them still haven't come around, but most of them have come around, and it's taken quite a long time. But I just have kept at it and adding to the information. Other labs have confirmed things, and it's not universally accepted, but just sticking with what I really could see in my own data and was confident about. But that's been quite a challenge over the years. I've been publicly insulted by Nobel Prize winners. That's one of my proudest achievements, I think. They turned out to be wrong. So that would be both a proud achievement and a challenge.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Pat. So this kind of is similar to the last question, but how do you overcome any feelings of self-doubt as a scientist throughout your degrees and your careers? Yeah, Dr. Hyde.
I would just say real quick, I don't think you really do. Like, it's always there, but you try to learn how to process it positively, um, and hopefully also watch out for your health while you're doing that. So, I know a lot of folks do end up with ulcers or various types of stress-induced ailments. So watch out for that. Um, but that's where you have to kind of also make sure that you're in a group that will support you, have friends and colleagues who will um, come to your aid or help you with your latest assignment when necessary.
Thank you. Dr. Taylor.
I struggle a lot with self-doubt, and I have for all my life, basically. And it really wasn't until I got quite a bit older, basically after I became a full professor, that I started to sort of say, this is stupid. Like, if I looked at my CV, if I was on a committee that had to evaluate me to be promoted to full professor, of course I would give that person, full professorship based on my CV. But it really did, it was a big challenge, actually, talking about challenges. For me, it was a really big challenge. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to organize a workshop at York where we invited an expert on the imposter syndrome. And she came and she gave 3 different workshops in one day. Whoa, was she a powerhouse? But she wrote a book, and she said so many things about how, especially women, you internalize all the mistakes you make. And I mean, okay, I don't want to be so gender sort of specific, but I really wish I had sort of, I knew what the imposter syndrome was way earlier in my career, like just putting a label on it. So if you don't know what imposter syndrome is, it's you basically feel like you don't belong there, you're a fraud, and sooner or later, everyone else is gonna figure it out, right? So she has a lot of strategies, and I highly recommend, if you suffer from that, to look it up on the internet and try to learn about it, and ultimately give yourself a break and don't apply standards to you that are more stringent than you would apply to the other people that are around you. So it is, like Elena said, it is, for me anyway, a struggle. But now I'm too old and I don't really care what other people think of me anymore. So I'm good.
Thank you. Dr. Heffernan.
Yeah, so I'll just add that I knew what imposter syndrome was a little bit earlier on in my career. And there was a point where I was like, well, I'm actually maybe good at what I'm doing, or I'm really good at making other people think that I know what I'm doing. And if you get to that point where all these people think that you're doing good stuff and you think that maybe you're not, well, maybe you actually are. So you can't be better at pulling the blanket over people's heads than you are at actually doing what you've been educated to do and what you're interested in.
Thank you. Dr. Pat.
Just a second, what everyone's been saying and what Wendy's been saying. I think getting old is one of the best things for your self-confidence. When I hit the age of 40, I figured I might be halfway through my life. And so I'm older than half the people, or more than half the people in the world. I probably know more than half the people in the world. So I have the right to my opinion. So, but we all suffer from self-doubt, I think. And if you don't you'd better watch out, because self-doubt can be useful when it makes you check your data again. Make sure you haven't convinced yourself of something that maybe you should doubt a little bit. So as a good scientist, you should always have a little doubt there, a little bit of critical thinking. Um, but yeah, we all will have some self-doubt.
Thank you. Dr. Hyde?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more on this same topic, actually. So one of the things that I always like to do is, having done a bit of different things, I've done a bit of astronomy, a bit of engineering, a bit of data science, a bit of consultancy. And one of the first things I learned when I started being a consultant for companies in Australia looking at machine learning and data science was that the algorithms that they use to sort everything from your refrigerator types to the resumes of the people applying for various different things are all biased. And they're all biased in different ways by very, very, very specific words. And if you have the opportunity to do a basic research methods course, data science, one of the things they actually show you at the end usually is how artificial intelligence and word pattern recognition can help you in your resume writing, in your LinkedIn descriptions, in your GitHub blogs, in your self descriptions, that will trigger either sorting algorithms or actual human brains to perceive you differently and more competently and make your contract more likely to be picked up. And so this is actually a practical point of view as well. And you might have been heard of some of the famous cases of course, the Amazon biased resume sorting machine, which is a whole other story. But there are very specific words that you should not use to describe yourself or any woman ever. And there are actually a list of them. And looking through that and looking through the words that you should use instead is really, really useful and a very practical tool. So I actually would encourage everybody to do that and try to describe yourself using those positive associated words, because you don't necessarily have to believe it, but now your description is more accurate. So anyways, that's my machine learning tie-in.
Thank you. Our next question is, what are your suggestions for gaining experience and finding opportunities throughout university? Yes, Dr. Pat.
So this is something I kind of specialize in because it's one of the things I really enjoy doing, is telling students about research opportunities. And I'm the faculty advisor for a club on campus called ARPE, Association for Research Placement at York. And they usually hold several events each year that are presentations explaining how you can go about getting research opportunities. And we really do have a lot of opportunities. I invented a class called the Research Practicum, which is a way to get students volunteer opportunities in labs that goes on your transcript as a course. So it actually says you did a research practicum on your transcript. It's a 0 credit course, so it doesn't affect your grade. We have opportunities to get paid as part-time research assistants under the RAY program, Research at York. We have the very prestigious NSERC USRA, which is a whole summer where you get paid to work full time. It's very competitive, but it also is a very prestigious thing. And we have the 4th year honors thesis projects where for many of the degrees, you have the opportunity or required to actually go into a lab and work for maybe 2 terms, doing your own individual project and then writing it up and presenting it as if it's like a little mini master's thesis. And it's great opportunity, great experience if you think you do want to go into science. Might want to do a master's or a PhD to find out what it's really like to do your own project, collect your own data, have it fail again, have to do it again, finally get the results, get to write it up and get to present it. So always to find those, we make you go out and beat the bushes and contact professors. We don't actually match you up for any of those. So you have to learn how to write a good email that explains a little bit about yourself. Why do you want to do research? What's your interest in research? Why are you interested in that professor's work? If we just get an email that says, hey, prof, do you have any space in your lab? And it isn't even signed, we're just going to delete it. We need to hear a little bit about you. You have to attach your transcript of your grades so that we know how you're doing in your courses. It's a good idea to attach a CV or resume, even if you haven't done very much. We'd like to know a little about you. What's your major? Have you done any research? Do you have any experience, even volunteer work? If you're volunteering in hospitals or something like that, we'd like to see what you're doing. So learn how to professionally approach a professor, and usually through email. The best way, of course, is if you can meet a professor through your courses and they get to know you a little bit, and then you can talk to them personally about whether they have opportunities in their lab. But don't let that be your only option. You should go through the list of professors, find out who's doing interesting things, and email a lot of them in a professional way.
Thank you, Dr. Pat. Dr. Hyde?
Yeah, I thought this would actually be a really good chance for me to put on my director of the observatory hat, because one of the things we do at the observatory on York campus is we have a huge number of student volunteers, student work study students, and student raised students, and student researchers from other places coming in to use the observatory. And one of the great things about it is not just that it's a facility that has a lot of capability to allow you to get, of course, that practical research experience, but anything you do, anything you have personally done, your personal projects are so valuable, because when you have your application to whatever you're going to do next, whether it's in science or not, you have your portfolio, you have your grades, and then you have, this is what I have done. And if you can show someone that you can do something, the chance that they're going to believe you that you can do it is all of a sudden much, much higher, right? You can just, you don't have to, it's not a debate. You can say, look, I have done this. I have created this code. I've reduced this data. I processed this result. So I would say that in addition to everything that Dr. Pat has said, of course, do email around and find something that you're really interested in pursuing so you can make it your project. And if it is in astronomy or telescopes or observing, well, actually, then you can email me.
Thank you. Our next question is, how can female graduates best prepare themselves for a career in the sciences? Yes, Dr. Heffernan.
I think it matters on what you mean with the definition of best is, because we have all taken different paths and we all have different lives and families and where we've come from. But I found that the thing that helped me the most was my PhD supervisor was my role model, and I was with her for 4 years. As a graduate student, I got to observe things that she did in her career, and I believe that that helped me best prepare for what I was going to do.
Thank you. So our next question is, what has the university done to help you feel supported and empowered as a woman in the sciences?
Well, we certainly have a network of people that we can go and talk to. We do have a sense of community in our faculty. So this is not the first time that I've met all of the panelists. So there we go with that. But also, it's important for you also to not just think about how the university can support you, but how you can also support the university, and then that helps you also support yourself.
Thank you. Has anything changed in the way women in science are treated from when you were a university student to now? Yes, Dr. Hyde.
Yeah, so I think I've seen a lot of positive changes, at least from my perspective. I mean, I'm not a student anymore, but when I was a student, I was in the US, I was in Germany, I was in France, I was in the Netherlands, I was in Australia. I actually became Australian, long story. But I saw a lot of things that were very much not on in terms of materials that were allowed to be left in physics study rooms or posted to walls, just really inappropriate stuff that doesn't even bear mentioning, really, because it's all very, very, very bad. Any one of which, I just don't see that anymore. You can't just put up um, bad posters in like the hallways of physics, and it's actually really nice to see that that is no longer okay. It's actually a much more, I think, understanding place, if anything. And so, especially from what I've seen from our in my 2 years at York, it's the students are amazing. They're so thoughtful and such good. I don't know, just it just gives me hope for the world, really. So I'm quite happy with it.
Thank you. Dr. Taylor?
So I was the only woman in my graduate program in my year. And I was one of only 2 women in the physics department for many years at York. So we now have, what do we have now, Elena? 6 or so women in our department.
Yeah, if at least if especially yeah, if we so we're counting everyone and contract people, and it's actually really nice.
It is really nice. So that's a big change. It didn't come easily, but I would say that, like, based on my career, the biggest change I've really seen happened in the last 3 to 4 years, when this idea of equity, diversity, and inclusion, not just an idea, but like a whole kind of movement, really got a lot of attention in academia and in industry. And although it hasn't changed everything, and there's still, there are still struggles for women and for underrepresented minorities, and especially in science and especially in physics, probably. I think that it's more kind of the society has sort of recognized that it is important to consider equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that more people are aware of it. And hopefully that will lead organically to a more inclusive and fair environment.
Thank you. Our next question is, can you think of moments when you faced adversity, specifically as a woman in STEM? What have you learned from these experiences, / how have you overcome it? Yeah, Dr. Taylor.
So I have a couple of funny stories. When I was an undergrad, I went for one of these USRA interviews, I guess. I don't know what, that was probably what the program was called even then. So for a summer job. And it was at an institute that was studying friction. And I remember, so I was going there and I put on my skirt and I tried to look professional, and I'm being interviewed. And the guy's like, we study friction. We use pistons with oil, and you're going to have to get your hands dirty. And then I realized I will never wear a skirt to another interview again. You can wear whatever you want, but that was the decision I made. And there was another funny story, which I'm not sure I learned anything from, but I had to travel quite a bit for my research because I have to go to the lab. So I used to travel to Chicago to go to Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, or now I travel to Geneva to go to CERN, and that ends up being a lot of border crossings. And you get to the border and the immigration officer's asking you, why are you coming into our country? So going to Chicago once, the immigration officer, well, first I think it was the baggage handler was asking me, not the baggage handler, but the security guy was asking me, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm coming to Fermi Lab. And he's like, oh, you're going to go smash some protons. And I'm like, yay. And then I got to the immigration officer and he said, what are you coming here for? And I said, well, I'm going to go to Fermi Lab and smash some protons. And the guy's like, don't talk to me like that, young lady. And it was just like, are you kidding me? But anyway, now, I know to not be snarky with immigration officers. So yeah, you just kind of go, okay.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Heffernan.
I guess one of the harder times during my career has been when I was pregnant, and people found it harder, I guess, to talk to me about science, or they were always commenting on how I must be very strong because I was still working while I was pregnant, or even just after I had the baby. And so those were things, well, while they're supposed to be compliments, they were also things that I just thought, well, this is just, normal for me to have a baby too. So there are some things that maybe just people should think twice before they think they're giving a comment.
I'm on mute. Yes, Dr. Hyde.
Yes, so I thought I would actually just circle around a little bit to something I had mentioned earlier, but there have been quite a few times, many times throughout my career, before it was a career even, where I encountered that I have found myself in a situation, an environment, a lab, a school, a general place in society where I absolutely would never be able to succeed any farther than I was. I realized that there would be no paths forward for me, and that I had no allies I could get to that could help me. And so one of the things I would say is that when you run into those things, sometimes a lot of, I don't know, maybe just me, but my tendency is I'm going to break through. I'm going to find a way forward. But sometimes finding a way around, maybe even to a different continent, can be a lot better for you. And sometimes you even end up at an awesome university like York next to a bunch of really cool telescopes. So that is something I just would generally recommend, maybe without too many specifics. If you do find that you're pushing and pushing and you're not getting anywheres, try looking someplace totally different, or talking to somebody, or cold emailing some professor whose article you read that you thought was really cool. And sometimes, that can really help.
Thank you. So our next question is, are there any ways you have impacted or changed the people around you due to the accumulated knowledge you have learned during your years of study? It's a good question. Yes, Dr. Heffernan.
I spent a lot of time going to high schools and other schools and libraries and giving public talks about disease modeling, and going on the news or radio during COVID and talking to family members, and even I go to the hockey arena a lot because my kids play hockey, and I talk to the parents there. And I really do think that I'm helping people understand more about how math and biology can actually work together instead of being totally two separate things. Because a lot of people think that math and biology, there's no way that they could do something together. And I do think that I'm helping people understand a little bit more too about how disease and vaccines and things like that, how they work and how they propagate. Trying to give people a little bit more sense during the pandemic rather than having fear during the pandemic.
Thank you. That's a really great answer. So we will move on to our last question of the evening. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists, what do you hope for the future of women in science? You can add any like tips that you have in there too. Yes, Dr. Taylor.
Well, I guess I hope, well, one thing I don't like about science right now is this hero worship, the culture of hero worship in science. And, you know, the Nobel Prize only goes to 3 people every year in a particular field. And it sort of creates this idea that scientists work alone and they're just some genius. And in reality, what science is a lot of people in the lab doing long and painstaking experiments, or at their, you know, office doing difficult calculations. And those people are really the backbone of science. So I think they deserve, you know, the unsung heroes who are doing those incremental scientific advances deserve to be recognized. So we need to understand that the Nobel Prize winners are just building on what every scientist is just working hard on day by day. So I would like, I hope that we can come to a place as a community to value and celebrate all scientists, and, you know, not put on a pedestal the select few who are lucky enough to hit it big. I think for women, I hope that society will learn to respect their contributions to science. You know, I hope women don't have, like, I hope we get to a place where women don't have to always defend themselves as having a right to be here, right? We all have a right to do science. And I also hope that a lot more men become, you know, right now there are men who are allies, but I hope they become more active allies and more vocal allies, and that so that they're most of the men, you know, are really on our side. And that's what I hope for women in science.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Yes, Dr. Pat.
So I would certainly agree with all of that. And along with the hero worship, I would say I hope that science becomes a little less competitive minded in the future, and a little less macho in what's expected for long hours, and anti-family policies that make it very difficult for people who would like to spend time with their families and having a life outside the lab, which for women who are still and will always have the burden of child rearing, makes it difficult sometimes. So I would like to see a less competitive, less macho attitude that makes lab life a little more family friendly.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Pat. Yes, Dr. Hyde.
I figure I can go next. So I of course I completely agree with everything everyone has said already. Collaborative, teamwork based events are, that is how real science gets done, and having one person standing and taking the credit is just not on. And the one thing I would really love to see is, especially you know, here in Canada, in, you know, especially like directly at York, I would love to see more of our you know, minority and Indigenous colleagues actually joining us at, you know, sort of the professor ranks in the university, you know, and actually opening it up, you know, to a much wider range of diversity. And I, you know, it just is, you know, so important to have those good collaborations and bring in amazing people. And we're still missing so many amazing people. So I think that would be my big hope for going forward.
Thank you, Dr. Hyde. And Dr. Heffernan.
So I think that my hope is that we just all advance science as well. We make those new findings, we help spread the news, and we show how a good supportive environment with men and women and anyone else in the science community can work together just to advance science. That's the goal.
Thank you. Thank you all for your answers. And thank you to our professors for being here tonight and sharing your experiences as women in science. We really appreciate your time and your dedication.